Okay, so we're going to go to the second question, which is question 1.3. And there they're going to give us a case study, and they're going to ask us 3 questions there. So for each of the small case studies, they're first going to ask us what is the cases in that case study. So a case is basically the observation. What are we observing? For 2, they're going to ask the variables and their types in the case study. So that is what we're measuring on the observation. And then for the third one, they're going to ask us what is the main research question in the studies prescribed below. So there we just need to figure out, okay, what is the purpose of the study? Why are we measuring these people or things? And what do we want to answer based on those measurements? Okay, so I'm only going to look at 1.3.b in this case. And this question deals with the Buteyko method. Okay, so the Buteyko method is a shallow breathing technique developed by Konstantin Buteyko, who was a Russian doctor in 1952. And anecdotal evidence suggests that the Buteyko method can reduce asthma symptoms and improve quality of life. So with anecdotal evidence, we mean that before this, there wasn't a formal study on it. A lot of people were saying it helped, other people say it wasn't. So that's what we mean with anecdotal evidence. A lot of people were telling stuff about this. Okay, so based on this anecdotal evidence, researchers decided, okay, but they want to do a formal scientific study. So in a scientific study, they then tested the effectiveness of this method. So researchers recruited 600 asthma patients aged between 18 and 69 who relied on medication for asthma treatment. Okay, so these patients within these 600 patients were then split into 2 research groups. One practiced the Buteyko breathing method, and the other group did not. So they just carried on with their medication. And then patients were scored on the quality of life, so they scored themselves. And this was based on their asthma symptoms and medication reduction on a scale of 0 to 10. So on the scale, which the patients scored themselves on, of how were their life during the study, on average, the patients in the Buteyko group who practiced that method experienced a significant reduction in asthma symptoms and an improvement in quality of life compared to the people that did not actually use this method. Okay, so the question then is, based on this case study, what do we think is the cases? What are the observations? What are the variables? So what did the scientists measure for each of these patients? And then the last one is, what is the main research question in the studies that they actually wanted to answer? Okay, so for the first question, they ask us, what is the cases in this study? So this refers back to section 1.2 in the prescribed textbook on page 3 and 4, specifically 1.2.1, which deals with observations, variables, and data matrices. So a case is simply the thing that we're observing. So we just have to answer, okay, what are we actually observing? What are we taking measurements on? So in this case, our cases is our patients, the patients that had asthma. So our cases will be the 600 patients in the study, patients that we have there. So one way to answer this is to look at that case study and try to figure out what would this case study results look like in a data matrix. So for a data matrix, we will have our 1, 2, 3, to our 600 observations, and each observation will then be based on an actual patient. Okay, so these observations are then our cases, our 600 cases. Okay, so the second question there is, okay, what is the variables for this case study? And the variables is simply the stuff that we actually measured on our cases. So in this case, it's actually 2 variables. So one is a little bit easier to identify than the other one. So the obvious variable is that quality of life measurement that the occupants or the cases had to measure themselves of. So as I said in the case study, patients were split into a treatment and a control group. And then after practicing this method or not practicing it, they then had to sort of measure their own quality of life out of a score of 1 to 10. So that's the first variable, is that quality of life, which I'm just going to call here Q for quality of life. And there they measured it from 1 to 10. So that is the first one here. So if you were to put this in a table, we see that patient 1 rated himself 7, that guy rated himself maybe 5, maybe that guy 1, and so forth. until patient 600, which had a really good quality of life. So this is the easiest one to identify. So the variable is the stuff that we measure, and that goes into our different columns that we have in our data matrix. Okay, so as I said, that's the first one, the easy one. There's actually a trickier one as well. And that has to do with the control group and the treatment group. So if we only have this one here, then we don't actually know which patients were in the control group and which ones were in the treatment group. So we don't know which patients actually used that method of the Russian scientist. So that's why we actually have a second variable as well, which was whether the group practice, or whether the case practiced that breathing technique or not. So that breathing technique is called the Buteyko Method. So I'm just going to call that B for Buteyko Method. And this is going to be a 1 or 0, or a yes or no. So yes, that patient used that breathing method, or no, he didn't. So that's actually our second variable, is whether the patient used that breathing method or he didn't. So that will be, for this guy, might be 1 for yes, then 0 for no, and that guy didn't use it, and then we go on, and yes, that guy actually used that breathing technique as well. So this one is important. So yes, we split the group into a treatment and control group, but for each case, we then need to actually assign that variable to a case. Otherwise, we won't know which of our cases was in the treatment group and which were in the control group. So just to add further detail, we know that quality of life, the participants rated it from 1 to 10. So we can consider that to be an ordinal variable, because there's a natural ordering in that variable. It goes from 0, 1, 2, 3 to 10. We might even want to analyze this as a numerical variable if you want to, because it's from 0 to 10. For the second one, this is a pure categorical variable, which is either 1 or 0. So there's no order to it. So again, this one can be categorical ordinal, because there's a natural ordering to it from 0 to 10, or it can be numerical. We can consider that as well. And this one is purely categorical 1 or 0. There's no order in that 1 or 0. We can't say that 1 is better than 0 in this case. Okay, so the last question we're going to look at is, what is the research question that we try to answer in the study? So this is the long answer, and this is basically, what was the study for? What is the purpose of the study? And there, the purpose of the study was just to see whether this breathing method actually has a positive impact in reducing asthma symptoms and improve the quality of life of people. Okay, so that's the very short question, or the short answer to this question, is that the research question is just, does this method that the scientists developed, does it actually have a positive impact on asthma symptoms of patients?